And it's very different for two reasons. The first reason is that in the water system, it's self-contained and it just keeps going round and round. It is a cycle. But what is going on in this process is the system is expanding. Why is it expanding? It's expanding because you're producing surplus value. And surplus value is going to be used to produce more surplus value. Therefore, the system is not a cycle. It is a spiral. And as a spiral, it is out of control, potentially. It is constantly growing. And actually, historically, we know that this system has been growing at the rate of somewhere between 2 and 3% per year, at a compound rate, since around 1780 or whatever. Now, compound rates of growth produce exponential growth curves. Those growth curves go like this. We are in that growth curve right now, and I want to talk specifically about the pressures that are rising out of this system as the growth takes place. But it grows in a number of different ways. It expands geographically. And as some of you know, I've worked a lot with the idea of what I call a spatial fix. This system works very well within a territory, but it's producing so much surplus it cannot absorb it within the territory. So it exports capital to somewhere else. Britain sent capital to the United States, sent it to Argentina, sent it to Uruguay. And this export of capital produces what I call a spatial fix to the dilemmas of absorption of the surplus. Not only does it expand geographically, it also accelerates in time. It moves faster, and it moves faster and faster and faster. Which means that this has to change dynamically over time. And speed up becomes absolutely critical. How many innovations in the history of capital are about speeding things up? Why is it that we actually think speeding things up is a good idea? And why is it when we speed things up we get very stressed out? Totally stressed out. But we are in the world of speed up. And it operates everywhere. Academia, that is one of the sleepiest places you can imagine, is full of speed up. When I started as an academic, if you publish more than 2 books in a lifetime, you were thought to be not serious. Nowadays, as an academic, if you don't publish a book every 2 years, people think you died. And in order to assert the fact that you're alive, you have to write another goddamn book. Well, life in corporations is like that. I mean, it's like that everywhere. And it's very interesting, because one of the things that Marx says about socialism is that socialism is about free time, doing nothing. And if you ask people today, how much free time do you have? The answer is, I don't have any at all. Furthermore, capital is producing things which are transforming the world very rapidly. I mean, I like at this point to sort of say, look, I'm still using my grandmother's knives and forks. If capital made things that lasted 100 years, and they're very beautiful, I don't want to change them, you know. And they're very effective. If capital did that, it would have gone out of business a long time ago. So it makes new things and new varieties of things. I mean, all of you have got cell phones. What model cell phone do you have? And if you haven't got the latest cell phone, there's something wrong with you. I have an old computer, you know, so really old. That? Why are you still using that? The answer is because I know how to use it, and the new ones are very sophisticated, and I haven't the faintest idea how to use them. So I really need to have an assistant who's 5 years old to actually teach me how to use these things. So this is the world that we're living in. There's acceleration going on, there's expansion going on. Now, in this diagram, there are some contextual conditions which you'll notice. Marx, these are things that Marx mentions and says are terribly important, but which he's not going to deal with in detail. The first of these is the question of the social reproduction of the labourer. What goes on in the household and how social reproduction in general is organised in this society. Marx mentions it several times and says this is important, but I'm not dealing with it because I'm going to assume it's on one side. Now, just because Marx made that assumption doesn't mean that we have to make that assumption. In fact, if we want to make a real complete picture of this, we have to work very hard to look at social reproduction in much greater detail than Marx did. And of course, this is what a lot of Marxist feminists have worked very hard upon, and the whole kind of question of how to incorporate an understanding of household labour and household activities and so on into the dynamics of a capitalist system is a very important issue, and I think that we have to add this to what Marx has done. But Marx himself said, I know it's important, but I don't have time to deal with it here, and I'm going to theoretically assume it out of my picture. Now, there's nothing wrong with making assumptions. Absolutely nothing wrong. There is something wrong when people read something and ignore the assumptions. And actually this happens to Marx a lot. And get criticised for making assumptions. Yes, Marx gets heavily criticised, or was heavily criticised by certain segments of Marxist feminism because he didn't deal with household labour. My argument all along is, yes, you're right to criticise and say we should be dealing with it, but I think you're wrong to kind of say that Marx was wrong to exclude it. I mean, he did it by assumption, doesn't mean it's unimportant. Similarly, at the bottom of this diagram, you see I talk about the production of space, place, nature. And Marx does talk about the metabolic relation to nature. He talks about the production of space in very casual kinds of terms. He talks about the production of urbanisation and the like in very sort of small scale terms. Again, he doesn't deal much with this, but he does not declare it as unimportant. In fact, he mentions that the metabolic relation is foundational, and that the metabolic relation to nature is a critical question, and how it works is a critical question. And therefore, again, work has to be done, as in the field of social reproduction, to say, all right, let's take this question seriously. Much of my own work on urbanisation in relationship to this, and the production of space and production of places of various kinds, and indeed the whole kind of transformation of nature and environment and environmental questions, much of my work has been down in that corner, sort of saying what's the relationship, what's going on here with what's going on in this general circulation process. But notice something. You can't take, say, even social reproduction, and you can't take the whole kind of production of space and place and nature and take it out of connectivity to what is going on in this circulation process. I've mentioned speed up. What's the consequences of speed up for the way in which built environments are constructed, the way urbanisation is working, how fast urban environments are being transformed? I live in New York, and it's a permanent building site. It's perpetual motion, urbanisation. And it's very hard to live with. The noise is terrible, the dust is awful, you know. And we promise one day that construction will cease. And I live in this area where one day all the construction disappeared, and I thought, this is really weird. And I didn't have to wait another 3 weeks before it was all back again. So the turnover time becomes important, and how are resources cycled into the production of the built environment, the production of urbanisation and the like. The same thing happens with not only the physical environment, but also the cultural and historical environment. And I put two sort of links here. One is free gifts of nature. That is, what it is that capital appropriates from the natural world and doesn't pay for. It appropriates from the social reproduction process without paying for it. It also appropriates from human culture without paying for it. It takes, for example, the mental capacities of workers and capacities and histories and so on, and takes them and actually uses them as means to its own ends. It will take, say, the sorts of indigenous practices with respect to indigenous medicines, and it will turn them into patents of drug treatments and things of this kind. So it will engage in biopiracy, it will raid human cultures, and it will do all of these kinds of things. So it's stealing, if you like, from this whole kind of area around it, and not paying for any of it. At the same time, it's doing things which have profound impacts upon these areas. That is, it's profoundly affecting culture. And I've got something in there about wants, needs, and desires. Actually, the history of capital is very much about the production of new wants, needs, and desires. And it's going on around us all of the time. And not in a simplistic kind of sense that is subject to the advertisers and all the rest of it. But what happens here is you get the production of a way of life. And that way of life demands that we have certain practices. And those practices demand that we have certain commodities in order to work with those practices. Capitalism produced after World War II in the United States suburbanization. Suburbanization demanded automobiles, it demanded rubber, it demanded, in the end, a whole bunch of consumer durable goods, like refrigerators. And then eventually TVs. And you turned on the TV, and what did it show you? It showed you all these comedy, these kind of series on TV which were celebrating the suburban lifestyle. In other words, what happens is a whole kind of mental conceptions. And actually it turned out that this was a very good way to ensure social control. Suburbanites are not very good revolutionary characters. When everybody is a homeowner living out in the suburb, with 2 cars in the drive and a little pool in the back, they're not going to revolt against capitalism. They're not going to become part of an anti-capitalist. But there were some people who hated it. First wave feminism described the suburb as the prison from which they had to escape. And this is, I think, these ways of life become very important. I mean, 15 years ago, I'd be in here, and if I asked if everybody had a cell phone, everybody would say, "What's that? Is there anybody here who doesn't have a cell phone? Is there something in your DNA that says you have a want, need, and desire to have a cell phone?" But a way of life has been constructed where we all have to have cell phones, whether we like it or not. And it's having major impacts upon daily life, and of course it's speeding things up because that's what capital wants. That's what capital needs, and it wants to keep you occupied. It certainly doesn't want to give you free time to think. The last thing in the world capital wants is for you to turn into thinking subjects. To think you need free time. Take away all the free time, and then what are we left with? Passive sorts of audiences that are not going to revolt against what is becoming an insane system. So this is, if you like, the sorts of things you start to see with this. The other thing I see with it is this. That when you start to ask the question, that each one of these links, a bit like the water cycle, at each one of these transmission points, there is a possibility of breakdown. How do you make sure that there's always a market there? How do you make sure that there's always enough money there for the capital? How do you make sure of this? In other words, this system has to be managed somehow. And neoliberalism was very much about managing this system in a certain kind of way. And it managed it by shifting, if you like, where the main power nexus is that is driving this system. Now, this system, as I've said, is not a cycle, it is a spiral. And the energy for the spiral means that something bigger is being created all along. Where is it being created and how? The volume 1 story of Capital says it's being created by the creation of surplus value in production. That's where the energy is coming from. And the energy for that comes from the individual entrepreneur or the corporation wanting to gain a profit and wanting to expand to gain more profit. So that's the story tale of volume 1. But the story tale of volume 2 is rather different. It kind of says, well, actually, there's a problem about the market, the effective demand. What happens when there's not enough effective demand in the market? What happens when there's not wants, needs and desires to buy all those automobiles which are being created? And here you start to find politics and the rest, and the state becomes terribly important. The state becomes very important in managing effective demand. And in the 1930s, it was recognized that the failure to manage effective demand was a real serious problem. And that therefore they needed a new economic theory to deal with that situation. And that was, of course, the theory of Keynes. So Keynesian economics starts to come into the picture, and demand management starts to enter into the picture. Now, the United States in particular was faced with this huge problem in 1945. It had been through the slump of the 1930s, massive unemployment of capital and labour, and somehow or other things weren't working. The system was saved by the war, and the war, of course, led to actually an expansion of productive capacity. So by the time you get to 1945, you've expanded production capacity immensely in the United States. And you've got a returning labour force of people who fought for freedom and liberty and all these kinds of things. And they're coming back to a country where they may face unemployment. And the US corporate elite was terribly concerned. And it was also concerned on political grounds. Actually, if you want a good example of a centrally managed, planned economy, look at the United States in World War II. It was planned. All the corporate heads were brought together, steel, automobiles, armament, they were all brought together. And basically Roosevelt said, plan us a world. Well, they did. And they kind of said, oh my God, what we did was we actually organized socialism. This is dreadful, they said, because at some point people will say, well, they don't want the corporate heads anymore. We can just have this system. And furthermore, they've been in alliance with the Soviet Union. Oh my God, this is even worse. So in 1945, the corporate elite were terrified of what to do. They knew they had to have full employment. Otherwise, they had a working class returning from the war who knew how to shoot guns and knew very effectively what they had worked for. So they had to have full employment. How are they going to have full employment? Well, they had to create a demand, a huge demand, to mop up surplus productive capacity and surplus labour. Well, there are a number of ways in which they do that. One of them was, of course, to prolong the war, through the Cold War. So you did it through the armaments industry and the industrial, sort of military complex. So you did that, and there's now a huge kind of literature on the way this was manipulated. The economy was in difficulty. So somebody invented something called the missile gap, which was the gap between how many missiles they had in the United States and how many they supposedly had in the Soviet Union, all of which was, entirely made up. But by the time it'd been out in the press, we've got to cure the missile gap, so they had to go and make more and more and more of these missiles like crazy. And of course, when the Soviets first launched a satellite, that just sent the whole American upper classes crazy, so we've got to do the same thing. So that was a good way of doing it. The second big way was suburbanization. And you suburbanize the United States, and you started to do it. But if you're suburbanizing, then the question is, where does the money come from to build the suburbs? Well, part of it was going to be state financed, which could be debt financed. But then you needed somebody to buy the houses in the suburbs. How was that going to happen? Well, you had to create an affluent sector of the working class, which turned out to be almost purely white. And you ended up with privileged white working class, employed in the big corporations like General Motors and US Steel and all the rest of it, who could afford to buy a house in the suburbs. But for that to happen meant that class had to have good institutions like trade unions and all the rest of it, who would actually then be, not suppressed but encouraged. And you had to have a party, a democratic party, that was actually favourable to all of this sort of work. So after World War II, the whole thing was expanding. And this was the way it was done. It was done through demand management. In other words, it wasn't so much what was going on in Volume 1, it was what was going on in Volume 2 that was really the significant thing. But there was a bit of a problem with how that worked in Volume 2. Because the question would be, where does the state get its extra money from to debt finance? And the answer was it borrows from the banks. And then it borrows from its own bank, which means that it has to have a way of creating money of its own. So you then go into Volume 3. And what goes on in Volume 3 is this connection between the state apparatus and the financiers. You get the formation, and this has long been there, of what I call the state finance nexus, which plays an important role in managing this whole system. The state finance nexus. Actually, it first came about in 1694, when the British monarchy ran out of money in fighting its various wars. And it turned to all the rich bankers and merchants in the city of London and said, lend us the money to fight the wars. And the bankers and the financiers said, no. They said, well, you've got to do it. We'll push you around, we'll chop off your heads, we'll do those kinds of things. And the bankers still said no. So then, a compromise was reached. The bankers said, all right, you charter for us a central bank which will have power over issuing money. And that you give us the charter and we will manage the bank, and then we will use that bank to lend you the money you want to fight your wars. So this was the formation of the Bank of England, the first central bank in the history of capitalism. And the central bank then became critical. Notice, the central bank is not an arm of the state, it is the pinnacle of the financial system. The pinnacle of the financial merchant system. And actually, it's a very interesting feature. When you stand in around St. Paul's in London, you're standing on something called the City of London. The City of London is a separate jurisdiction from the rest of the country. And it's the City of London which is governed by the bankers and the financiers themselves. And basically it says to the state, no admittance accepted on our business. And so here you have a kind of something that's a bit like the Vatican, and actually acts like the Vatican. That is, they manage all kinds of global things inside of the City of London, and that is, if you like, the state finance nexus. They can create money, And insofar as they create money, they can then lend to the state that will manage the demand that will actually feed. So you can see that you have three sources of power within this system. The first source is the entrepreneurs and the corporations looking to expand their activity. The second is the management of demand, which is largely through the state, but the creation of new ways of life. And the third is the creation of new monetary power, which lies in volume 3 of Capital and which exists, is concentrated in what I call the state finance nexus. Now, the state finance nexus never wants to be seen. It likes to remain hidden. And it doesn't like publicity. But it then, at certain points, becomes very visible. I remember this in the midst of the crisis of 2008, just after Lehman Brothers had gone bankrupt, and the whole global financial system looked like it was going to collapse. And this was a moment where the president wasn't to be seen. He had no idea what to do. Members of Congress disappeared. Nobody could find them. The financial press didn't know what to say and what to do. But in the midst of this crisis, two people came on television and held out a 3-page piece of paper and said, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do it immediately. No argument, no nothing. And the two people who did that, one was Secretary of the Treasury, which is the state apparatus. The second was the head of the Federal Reserve, which is the pinnacle of the financial system. It was a state finance nexus, which came out and was personified in those two people who basically came out and said, this is what we're doing, and this is what you've got to do. Congress has to pass legislation. Congress was horrified that the legislation was only 3 pages long, so it took about 3 weeks to make sure it was 350 pages long. But they passed it. And of course, the system gets bailed out. This state finance nexus also coordinated with the International Monetary Fund, with the Bank of England, with the European Central Bank. So we're not simply talking, we're talking about a system. What did they do? They actually created more money. And they created it by something called quantitative easing. Now, quantitative easing is just adding zeros to the money supply. Now, this is something that's very interesting. Because when you're reading volume 1 of Marx, Marx talks about capital and says, well, capital can take money form, it can take form of production, or it can take commodity form. Which one of those forms can expand without limit? The money form. And interestingly, it could expand without limit providing there were no material barriers to the money form. Now, up until 1971, there was a material barrier because money was a commodity. The money commodity was gold. The world's financial system depended upon relationship to gold. And there's a finite amount of gold in the world, so you couldn't expand the total amount of gold. And there were problems in the 1960s. That people wanted to expand, and they were expanding money, but there wasn't enough gold there. There was a joke that could be told about the fact that, in the famous movie Goldfinger, where somebody's going to try and rob Fort Knox of all of the gold bars that are supposed to be there, that at that time there were no gold bars left in Fort Knox at all. It was empty. It would have been great if they'd actually got in there and they would have found nothing there. So, the system, the world system, went off the gold standard on August the 15th, 1971. After that, there was absolutely no limit to the expansion of the money supply. Gold was no longer relevant. The only limit was set by human regulation and regulatory And there's been a lot of difficulties with that over the years since 1971. But that moment was significant for the dynamics of this system, which I've said has a spiral form. That it is spiraling, and you cannot imagine what this would mean in terms of the expansion of this system in physical terms. You can only imagine what can happen by adding zeros to the money supply. So you go from a situation where the total size of the global economy in, say, 1970 was, I don't know, something like 15 or 20 trillion dollars. And now it's closer to something like $80 trillion. So there's this expansion, monetary expansion going on. And then the big question is, how is that monetary expansion reflected in the world of use values and the like? What kinds of things can be done with all of this expanding money supplies? Well, one of the things you can do is you can start speculating on asset values. So actually it's no accident that since 1971 we've seen a huge expansion of what you like here to call extractivism, the extraction of value from nature by actually enclosing natural resources and turning them into commodities which need a rent in order to be able to utilize them. So that instead of free gifts of nature, you have rent extractions. There are other things that can be done. You can start to use it to speculate on asset values, property, and the like. Now, at this point, I'm going to just shift a little bit and say, well, let's look more closely at what happened in 2007, 2008, when there's a financial crash. And that financial crash leaves the whole world in a situation of how is this system going to actually be revived? Interrupted, and there's real problems. And even sort of what might be called minor interruptions on the scale of this can do a lot of damage. And it was fascinating. I happened to move to New York in August of 2001. And 3 weeks later we had 9/11. And I always remember this time because everything stopped moving in New York City. Everything stopped moving. The bridges were closed, the tunnels were closed, nothing moved. Nobody did anything. And about 3 days later, when they opened the bridges and all the rest of it, all of a sudden, the mayor of New York City, followed by the President of the United States, came on the television and said, please get out your credit cards and start shopping, because if you don't, the economy will collapse. I mean, you know, here we are kind of dealing with all this smelly stuff, and we're told, go to Broadway shows, go to the restaurants. The demand was dead. Nobody was buying anything. And this was a disaster. The whole system was stopping. And suddenly the powers that be were yelling at you, kind of saying, for God's sake, get out your credit cards, start churning the stuff over, because otherwise the economic consequences are going to be complete disaster. But in 2008 then, this whole system was threatened with being stopped. Now, this is a very serious business, because exactly in the same way, if the water cycle stopped, we would all die of thirst. If this system stops, we would all die of starvation. Because this delivers our food supply, it delivers our energy, it delivers everything else. So I'm not in favor of kind of saying, okay, let's demolish the system and go back to living in Stone Age cages. Obviously not. But the question is, what is going to happen to this system, and how, from a socialist perspective, do we think about doing something which is different than is currently being done? Because what is being done now is not making any sense and is having huge physical consequences for what is happening on planet Earth. I mentioned the growth of the indebtedness. That is one thing, because if you issue all of that money, then it's going to be channeled first into an investment class, which is going to feed, if you like, credit upon the economy. And so what you see is an enormous kind of increase. This is the increase in total indebtedness in the United States since 1970 or so, in constant dollar terms. You notice it has a hiccup around 2008, but 2008, it jumps up after that, pretty much. And you notice, here we go, it's, the exponential, the signs of an exponential growth is clearly there. The big country that saved global capitalism was China. And China did it by a huge urbanization project, but you notice the top graph is the total indebtedness in China, which is, at the end of this story, is around 240-50% of GDP, which is a huge, huge kind of problem. And you notice, in 2007, it's sort of stable, and then after that, it soars. And you notice on the bottom graph is consumer debt in China, which is accelerated hugely in order to buy all those houses. You're building houses like crazy, you're doing it in indebtedness, somebody's got to buy them, so people get indebted. But look at this graph. The blue line at the bottom is the history of cement consumption in the United States over the last 100 years. The red bars are the consumption of cement in China. Okay, now look at that. Now, what's interesting is, you would expect, if there's a crisis, 2007, 2008, there will be a stoppage in the consumption of cement. There's not a stoppage here. It doubles in about 4 years after. I mean, just look at that and think about what that means for environmental consequences. How much cement has been spread around in China? All in the name of employing surplus capital and surplus labor that got unemployed because of the slump in the US consumer market. This is, to me, is a stunning graph, in the sense that if you say to yourself, well, the United States stabilized the world back in the 1950s and 1960s, and you can see a little jump in that. I mean, it's one of those things, the graph looks very small in retrospect compared to what China has done since. But then you imagine what might happen in another 20 years' time, and where it might happen. And it's not only cement, you see, because all of the other primary materials, the China growth, a third of global capital growth since 2007 has been located in China alone. But it has consequences for all of those countries that feed raw materials into the China production machine. This is world steel production. And again, you see that huge rise. But notice, there's the world production, and then there's the rise in China. This is total copper production, and the solid line at the bottom there is China. And then again you see the kind of exponential growth path of global copper production. So this is the kind of world in which, when you start to take the fact that actually capital can increase the monetary value of everything by as much as it wants. But then when you start to try to take some physical activity, which is actually going to be the consequence of that, you will get this massive increase in urbanization. And the interesting thing here is that this is not only China where this is going on. Every city I know, I've just seen it all around the Mexico City, there's a building boom going on. And it's all the big finance capitalists and all of the developers, and they're all getting in, and they're building shopping malls, and they're building meaningless, big sort of office space plants and towers, which are going to be what I call debt bottling plants. I mean, there's an insane form of urbanization occurring right now. In New York, we have one of the biggest building booms in the city's history. Bigger by far than occurred in the 1920s. It's a huge thing. And what are they building? Are they building affordable housing for the mass of the population? No way. That's not profitable. What are they doing? They're building high-rise apartments for the ultra-rich from around the world, and they hope that some ultra-rich people will want to have an apartment in New York City. And a lot of them do. So you get, families from China who invest in one of these things. They're not going to live there. We're building cities for people to invest in, not for people to live in. And the result in New York City is we've got 60,000 homeless people in the midst of this huge building boom where we're using all of these materials and all of these things to build things that have absolutely no use value whatsoever for the mass of the population. We can't get our subway system to work. It's a disaster because the upper classes don't use the subway system. If you ask them about do they have problems getting to their housing out in Long Island, the answer is no, I just take the helicopter. Yeah. I mean, so we have this and in New York City, half of the population is trying to get by on less than $40,000 a year, and you cannot find any place to live in New York City when you have that income range. Maybe you'll end up living miles out with tremendously long commutes or something of that kind. Now this is what I call an insane form of urbanization, which is all about the absorption of capital and labor to the profitability of the ultra-rich, and has nothing whatsoever to do with the well-being of the mass of the population. And yet the well-being of the mass of the population is told that the only way in which we can get actually housing to the lower income groups in the population is by finessing the market. No. The answer is you take it out of the market. You put it in the public domain. There are all of these areas of social life that belong in the public domain and do not really want to be or need to be in the market and should not be in the market. But actually what neoliberalism has been about has been colonizing all of those areas and putting it more and more into the market. Higher education in the United States. Talk about the debt economy. We have now over $1 trillion of debt, student debt in the United States. And nobody knows what's going to be done with it. But the interesting thing about the debt is the debt is a claim on future labor. And it's a claim on the future. And it means that people have actually already sacrificed their future. Simply to paying off the student debt and the student debt. Or, you saw that debt rise, paying off all of that debt. And here Marx is kind of comment a long time ago when he looked at the financial system and said, what this could be like at some point or other in time is that an accumulation of wealth is going to look like an accumulation of debt. And that's exactly where we are arriving at. And what are we going to do about this accumulation of debt? The difficulty here, of course, is the state finance nexus is at the center of this whole system. Right now, it's extremely hard to think about ways to disempower that state finance nexus. Because it's so ingrained, and even to the point where if you say the state has its power, no, the bondholders have the power. The financiers have the power. If you look at the situation of Greece, nobody in Greece would say to you, the state has the power. No. It's the IMF, it's the European Central Bank, it was initially the banks that lent them the stuff. They had the power. And actually, even in the United States, it is the case that the bondholders have the power. Because that is what neoliberalism has been about. It's been the transfer of real power from the state apparatus to the bondholders, so that the state simply does what the bondholders want. And there's simple examples of that are now. We've just had Amazon, which said, okay, we're going to expand, we will take bids on where we should expand. So everybody bid how many $1 billion and you would get in advantages. Now, I always thought that capital was supposed to stand on its own feet. But it turns out capital loves to live on public subsidies and won't move unless it has public subsidies. And here again, there's a power shift. And the shift in this system that I'm talking about, the shift in it is more and more into the center of the state finance nexus and who governs and who works that. And that state finance nexus, when I kind of described it as being like the Vatican, it's right, it's a feudal institution. It's not subject to democratic rule. It's not subject to it. It's about an oligarchy with its powers. In a sense, controlling finance and controlling the state apparatus. We're about to see a very simple kind of version of that. And it'd be interesting to see how this works out in the United States. Because Trump, for example, has been a classic neoliberal on almost all aspects of the system. He's disempowered environmental protection. He's opened up the federal lands to being drilled by minerals, oil, and all the rest of it. He's actually disrupted all forms of financial regulation. He's done all of those things. Absolutely done all those things. He passed a tax bill, which was a tremendous gift to the upper 1% and to the corporations, leaving the rest of the population with almost nothing. Pure neoliberal logic. Bolsonaro's just got elected in Brazil. What does he do? He turns to his finance minister, who says, I want to do to Brazil what Pinochet did to Chile back in 1973. That is the whole neoliberal program. But there are two aspects right now where Trump is not on the same board. One of them is on immigration, and we'll see how that works out. And the second is, of course, on this big fight with China about tariffs and all the rest of it. I don't know if you've noticed, but the stock market has been having a lot of problems recently. It's been crashing, in short. And one of the big fears is that actually Trump, by taking off after China, is going to destroy one of the big centers of economic development and economic growth. If he succeeds geopolitically, then capitalism is in real trouble, because one of its big growth centers is going to be dismantled. It's unlikely that's going to happen, but the second thing is that all this stuff about tariffs and all of that. So big capital in the United States is now turning against Trump, saying, we don't want these big wars. Now, so far, Trump has had a rising stock market, and he's claimed all the credit for it. He says, see, I'm here, I'm a big strong man, we've got a rising stock market, you know. Now it's crashing. Now what's he going to say? And in particular, what's he going to say to the president of China when he meets him very shortly? Is he going to say, we're going to really fight you tooth and nail on those tariffs? Or is he going to say, okay, look, enough of this nonsense about tariffs, my base will kind of understand if I say, okay, we've settled it all. It'll be very interesting to see what it does. Because right now that is, if you like, the immediate kind of question. But the long-term question is, what are we going to do about this system? Because that's how we live. We live in the confines of that system. We have to find ways to manage it. We have to find ways to take things out of its logic and provide them in a different kind of way. This is, if you like, the task of the left right now, is to start to discuss those things. But in order to do that, we have to understand how all of these struggles are situated within that map. And the reason I like that circulation process is it tells us, okay, there's an environmental fight going on. There's a fight over wages and conditions of production. There's a fight over realization. There are fights going on over cultural questions and over wants, needs and desires. There are all these fights going on everywhere. The anti-capitalist fight is everywhere. It's not simply in the point of production. And that everywhere is something that needs to be brought together. And the left, I think, has a fantastic opportunity right now to bring it together. Because there is mass alienation in the population right now. Everybody knows that system is not working except for the top 1%. That system is designed for the top 1%. And it has to be democratized. It has to be reconfigured in such a way as to meet the needs and wants of whole populations, rather than just segments of the population. That's the dilemma. Let me leave it there. So thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Professor Harvey. Thank you very much. I'm supposed to be a commentator, but I think I'm just going to make a couple quick comments and we go to the questions because there are a lot of people here who are interested in hearing from you. One thing we should put on the table is what's happening politically here in Mexico. On July 1st, there was a generalized uprising against neoliberalism. At least that's what the president-elect has put as his central platform, was to vote against neoliberalism. Is it possible to struggle against neoliberalism from one country? Or does this necessarily have to be a global fight? Is it just a pipe dream, an illusion to try to struggle from Mexico and Mexican state against this monster? That's the general question, and what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, for instance, are very clear responses from the system. The day that the airport was suspended in Texcoco, there was an attack on the stock market on the Mexican peso, and there was the international ratings agencies immediately responded to this scratch on their power. Then last week there was a proposal, just a proposal put on the table by a senator from the ruling party, the new ruling party, proposing to reduce commissions charged by banks to a half. In Mexico, the banks charge much more than other countries. And immediately also, the next day, there was a global reaction, an attack on the peso, the stock market, and in general on the indicators of the Mexican economy. These seem to indicate that the new government will be totally controlled by the system. But perhaps we could be more optimistic. That would be a first question, and then also a couple other ones at you too. One is, these are questions which come from, estas son preguntas de personas que están afuera que no pudieron acceder para darles una prioridad. One is, what are your predictions for this spiraling system? Are we on time? This is a similar question of mine. Are we on time to do something before the system crashes? Or is there no way back? And a third question is, how many kinds of neoliberalism do you see? For instance, neo-fascism, are there different subcategories of neoliberalism that we should to look at? And that's plenty for the first round while I collect the other questions. Por favor, ahí tenemos papelitos. Si pueden mirar sus preguntas, aquí tenemos una persona que está pidiendo un papelito, los otros, aquí están los jóvenes No podemos abrir el micrófono porque se nos va a ir de la mano. Llénalo, por favor. Sí, muchas gracias.
Well, you know, way down the road, we have to look for global solutions. And this may be easier than many people think. There have been many incidents over the last 20 years where there have been global expressions of public opinion. I remember, for example, February the 15th of 2003, when there was pretty much a global anti-war demonstration. 2 million people on the streets of Madrid, Barcelona, Rome, London, New York, hundreds of cities around the world had an anti-war demonstration. Now, there is what you might call a global consciousness around. And I think that this is something very important to cultivate and to think about. And I don't think that the fact that you have elected a government here in Mexico that is anti-neoliberal, which is not necessarily anti-capital, and I think the distinction is important. But on the other hand, I'm not going to say, oh, I'm not going to bother to support you because you're only anti-neoliberal. But you're going to get, obviously, political power is going to mobilize against you. And you're going to have to expect that. The question is then, how do you deal with that? But then I think there are many people that I know around the world, and I include myself in this, who are very thankful that at least here in Mexico, you're pointing in a direction which is radically different from, say, the neo-fascism we're seeing in many countries in Europe, and the kind of craziness that we're seeing in the United States. And I think there's a good deal of hopefulness about the fact that, Mexico has its revolutionary tradition. And revolutionary traditions have a habit of being resurgent from time to time. So who knows how this will work out here, and I think that as Mexico, as in a sense, a cosmopolitan center of the Latin American world, has a very important role to play to try to stop the rightward drift that's been going on throughout much of the rest of Latin America. But if you kind of say that the neoliberal solutions are great solutions, then I invite you to go look at Macri in Argentina right now, with an interest rate of 40% or something like that. Almost complete collapse of the economy, which is where the neoliberal path will typically lead you in these times, if it is vulgarly applied, as I think Macri applied it. So, yes, there are going to be limitations on you, no question about it, and those limitations may be from time to time with a big stick, But you've got to see that the system itself has an inherent weakness right now. And I think this weakness is something which is open to be exploited. And one of the things that I think that is very good about here and what is going on, for example, in the British Labour Party, which would be another place to look, is that there is an alternative. Margaret Thatcher was not right when she said there is no alternative. Yes, there are alternatives, and we can explore them. And I think that one of the things to do is to take things back into the public domain. And when I say public domain, I don't necessarily mean state control, because the state is, these days I think is a problematic institution. I'm not writing it off, but I think that taking something like healthcare, education, housing back into the public domain doesn't necessarily then put you in a situation where the state contracts with construction companies, and we know what kind of corruptions can follow from that kind of model. So there has to be, if you like, forms of governance which are being created in the public domain for the administering of many of these arenas of say, healthcare and education and the like. So I think there are things that can be done which carry with them a certain kind of public support. And I think it's very important, again, not to try to push a political movement onto a terrain where it does not feel comfortable. Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of intangibles in political transformations. Marx had this category which I often refer to, which is mental conceptions of the world and social relations. And he would argue that the revolutionary transformation is not simply about changing the economy or the flow of material goods. It's also about changing mental conceptions of the world and changing social relations. And that the intangible aspects of that are something which have to be worked upon politically. And here too, it seems to me that the tone which is set by a government kind of saying we want alternative forms of social relations. We want different, to understand the world in a different kind of way. So that you don't, for example, simply, just give you a concrete example, you don't simply increase investment in education. You also pose the question of what is it that's being taught, and what kinds of things are being said, what kinds of issues are being debated in the schools, and so on. So it's the content as well as the resources. Now you need the resources, but just simply getting the resources and not changing the content seems to me to not be at all what a revolutionary movement should be about. Now, I am in a minority in academia. I have, every now and again, I ask for more resources, and people say I should go to the corporations to get them. So I think of a Marx Institute funded by General Motors. And when I said that, I said it as a joke to the dean, and the dean said, yeah, that's a good idea, I'll support you. So, we need, yes, and I think that the transfer of resources and the reorientation of resources, and there's a lot of possibilities for that within the society. I think alternative media constructs, I hear that you in Mexico have a problem with the media in terms of media control, and the TV channels and the newspapers and you name it. So the big, most countries have this difficulty, and so there are ways, I think, to try to promote more public strategies of dealing with, again, the question of mental conceptions and social relations, to be able to talk about them more freely. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities of that side. Now, in terms of predictions, I think the system is very fragile. If I could predict clearly, then I would have made a lot of money, and I wouldn't be even talking to you. I would have joined the 1%. But the point here is that I think this is a very fragile moment, not only for the left, but I think for many people on the centre-right in particular, who are increasingly faced with the fact that the only way in which neoliberalism can work anymore is by establishing an alliance with neo-fascism. And many people feel very uncomfortable with that, so there's a lot of weakness in the thing. So, I think it's politically weak, and it's the justifications, the legitimacy of the system is in question. And this then leads to how many varieties of neoliberalism are there. The answer is as many as you want. Neoliberalism was never a fixed package. It was a set of pragmatic practices which had one purpose, which was making the rich richer at the expense of everybody else. And if you look at all of the data since 2007, 2008, what you find is that the ultra-rich have increased their wealth and power by something like 12 to 15%, whereas everybody else has either remained stagnant or lost. So that neoliberalism has always been about privileging the upper classes, and there are very different ways to do that. Different institutions, different cultural ways get used different ways. Lots of different ways in which you can do it, and I think that comes back to, do you consider neoliberalism as sort of a fixed entity? No, it's a fluid set of practices which have one aim only, and this aim is to improve the situation of the upper classes, the top 1%.
We are muchas gracias, Alberto. Muchísimas gracias. Un aplauso. Recibimos aquí en esta casa muy agradecido por su generosidad. We have lots of questions, Dave. I don't know how much energy and time you still have, but you're doing fine? Okay. Yeah, you're good too. A ver. There's a group of questions which go in a similar direction in terms of the collapse of neoliberalism, at least as a justificatory discourse. Mentioning Bolsonaro, Trump, Macri himself. Here's a citation to Garcia Linera, Vice President of Bolivia. And the question is whether we are approaching a post-neoliberal moment, at least in the question of ideology and legitimation. We can start with that one, and then I'll prepare some other synthetic questions based on what people ask.
Well, in the 1930s, when there was a big disruption in the global economy, there was a kind of total reorganization of social theory around questions of the role of the state, and in particular the economics of Keynes. So there was a new configuration. The crisis of the 1970s also produced a new configuration, one that I don't like and didn't want, but at least it was coherent in the sense that it said the stagnation that we're experiencing in the economy, the stagflation, which is a combination of stagnant unemployment and rising inflation, can only be answered by a reorchestration of what the role of the state must be. And so the state increasingly moved out of social provision and moved into a position of supporting, through public-private partnerships, corporate capital. So a reconfiguration of the state and what the state was about, and a reconfiguration of political power by disarming the powerful side of the working class movement, which was the white working class in the global north, to do that. And at the same time was about releasing entrepreneurial capacities and powers and generating a kind of atmosphere of market freedoms and so on. So it was a new system which had some coherence to it and had a great deal of popular support, including from elements on the left and the like. That began to run out of steam in the 1990s, but now we're in a situation in 2008 where clearly that answer is not working and you need something different. The thing that's striking to me, however, is that since 2008 there has been no coherent answer as to where to go. And the way I look at this is that actually, my kind of symbolic kind of way is that, in the Keynesian years, capital was working on the basis of what Marx described in Volume 2 of Capital. And it kept all the forces of Volume 1 and Volume 3 under control. After 1972, it went back to the Volume 1 model of capital, which was a 19th century model, and started to keep under control the kind of the state apparatus side of things. So it went back to that. We're now lost in the middle of the Volume 3 mess. What is going on in terms of the relationships between financiers and the state? What is going on in terms of the relationship between financiers and the extraction of rent? We've seen a re-emergence of a rentier class that is not only renting land but intellectual property rights and all the rest of it. And so we're lost in a real mess as to how to sort out the relations between the different factions of capital. I mean, who's ruling here? The producers or the merchants like Walmart? And in a sense, Apple is a merchant capitalist firm. It's not a producing firm. So what's the relationship between the different factions of capital? Who's ruling here? The industrialists seem not to be terribly powerful anymore. They're under the thumb of the merchants, of the big merchant capitalists, and they're under the thumb of the financiers. And the financiers, by and large, are dominating the state apparatus. Now we've got a problem of who is going to be the organized resistance to what is going on in this Volume 3 mess, And, the left still thinks in Volume 1 terms, and so, forget the conventional left, because, they're happy to talk about the Volume 1 stuff all the time. Volume 2 is kind of a little bit more of a problem. Volume 3 is a total disaster when it comes to sort of thinking, having a clarity of the left thinking in terms of exactly what is the left position. I mean, and it's even down to who's the enemy. Who's the enemy? We've got a vague sense of the top 1%, and we can talk about that. But then when you start to look at how they're organized and where they're located, the capitalist class today is very different from what it was in the 1970s. In the 1970s, it was the heads of General Motors and Ford and US Steel and all of those kinds of things, and maybe some of the big banks like the Rockefellers and so on. Who is it today? Well, it's Bezos, and it's Apple, and it's Amazon, and media companies and the like, and you're kind of going, well, this is a different capitalist class. And what is that? And who is going to take on that capitalist class? What weapons do we have? And something like Google is very difficult to take on, for the simple reason that it doesn't have any production. It doesn't engage in production. You know who produces the wealth of Google? We do. We produce the wealth, and they appropriate it. And this is like the famous putting out system of the 17th century, when people would go around and get the peasants to make all the work, and then they would extract it. I mean, we're having our own. I mean, and of course it gets to the point now where even in services we do the servicing. I mean, you don't get checked in at an airport anymore. You check yourself in at the airport. And if you can't press the right buttons, and I never can, I get into a terrible mess. I nearly miss planes. That's why I got used to going to airports an hour early just to make sure that. So this world has been transformed. So the big question is, well, how do we organize in relationship to this? And this is where the concept of alienation becomes terribly important to me. I think we have alienated populations, alienated in terms of their jobs. It's not only that it's hard to find a job, but it's very hard to find a meaningful job. Lots of jobs are just meaningless. I mean, I talked to sort of people who used to be steel workers before they were laid off, and yes, they were exploited, and they understood their exploitation. but they certainly understood their job had a meaning, and they had a certain kind of sense of pride about what their job was about. They had that. But that's all been taken away. You don't have jobs like that anymore. So the employment structure is a disaster. And we have the sort of gig economy, the self-employed economy, and all the rest of it. We have all the sharing economy, we have all these kinds of things. It's very hard actually right now to see where all of that is going and what it's about. But what we also know is that artificial intelligence is coming down the pike, and what happened in manufacturing is now going to be happening in services. So we know that. But then that raises the question of where's the market going to come from for all the things that capital produces, and how is that market going to be established? So there's a kind of real transformation going on in society, and we have to be sort of on top of it. I find it very difficult to be on top of it. This is the sort of thing that we need major research institutes, it seems to me, that the right wing typically funds to spread its neoliberal gospel. We need something equivalent for that, to be able to sort of pursue in an organised kind of way how to best approach the possibilities that exist through artificial intelligence and all the rest of it. I'm certainly of the opinion that we don't want to resist artificial intelligence. In fact, we want to encourage it. The big question is who's going to use it, for whom is it going to be used, and how are the benefits that come from that going to be distributed in society, where at the moment all of the benefits seem to be flowing just to one small group of population globally. I mean, Oxfam produces every couple of years a kind of a statement, and I don't know, about 8 years ago it had something like 364 families control the same wealth as only 50% of the world's population. The last one they said was 8 families controlling the same wealth as 50% of the world's population. Well, this is obscene. This is outrageous. This is, you know, and actually when you start to look at this system, and you look at what they're building and all this kind of stuff, you kind of say, this whole capitalism is completely insane. You know, and any sane individual would say, don't do that. But if you kind of say to somebody, don't do that, people say, oh, wait. So yeah, no, we've got a real set of serious problems there which need to be addressed. But again, you know, I'm glad I have an audience here. I mean, you're smart, you're intelligent, you can go over and you can start working on these things. So just go home from here and come up with solutions next week. I'm always being asked to do that, so that's the kind of question you ask me, you know. We've got a lot of problems in Mexico, tell us what to do.
A lot of the questions precisely try to push you in that direction. In generally, what do the contours look like of the post-capital system? I mean, is it what Marx dreamed of, or you know, what can you see on the other side of the rainbow?
I think some of the basic ideas you take from Marx, or can take from Marx, are very useful as kind of general guidelines. I think the transformation of social relations is crucial. I think the way in which, for example, class relations are set up and their persistence, the lack of empathy, not simply from the very upper classes to everybody else, but I think lack of empathy of any class that's at this position for anybody beneath. And I think it's interesting that sometimes when you see when you get, I'd be very interested to talk to people about how people reacted to the earthquake last year. I mean, things of that kind can produce as Hurricane Sandy produced in New York, which was Occupy Sandy. you know, and actually brought things together. And I think that you kind of look at that, and for a moment, as it were, a lot of these distinctions drop away, and there are solidarities along different lines, and it evaporates. Now, is there some way of taking those forms of solidarity and making them into something which is more permanent? And I think, you know, Lefebvre had a very interesting kind of theory of revolutionary transformation. He says, you know, moments occur in people's lives when they see the possibility of doing something radically different. Radically different. And it's like a freedom from all that garbage you have in your head, or what Foucault called the fascism that reigns in our head. Somehow it's all liberating. And those liberatory moments are incredibly important. It creates a memory and a possibility. And that's what makes me very hopeful, is that you see these moments when people really do come together and feel, you know, that there is something that can be done. What should be done and what, I mean, I think the idea of free time, we have a kind of a social form where, you know, Marx kind of had this sort of statement. He said the realm of freedom begins when the realm of necessity is left behind. And I think, I'm not sure whether Deng Xiaoping read that, but in 1978 it was clear that the Chinese population was not free because most people were locked into abject poverty. And he understood that the only thing to do for China was to try to bring as many people as possible out of abject poverty. And the figures these days are really startling in China. I mean, there were 840 million people classified as being in abject poverty in 1980, and now there's about 80 million. I mean, this is an astonishing accomplishment. Now, the big problem in China is how you're going to use the situation where the realm of necessity has been left behind, and of course they've got a class system and all that sort of thing that's grown up, so there's no problems with it. But the point here is that you know, when Marx makes that kind of comment, I think it's important to say, look, we have the productive capacity and the productive powers right now for everybody in the world to have a reasonable standard of living in a reasonable living environment. And we can do it without wrecking the natural world, and we can do it, in other words, it's possible to do that and do it in such a way that people have a lot of free time, and then they can do what they like, you know. And contrary to what many people say about Marx, I think he is a person who is very much about the emancipation of the individual. But his point is, emancipation of the individual without the emancipation of other individuals is a fantasy and a fraud, and it will not work. Therefore, the emancipation of the individual rests on solidarities and the creation of solidarities. And the kinds of solidarities that we mentioned occurred in the wake of the earthquake are precisely the kind of solidarities that allow for individualism of a certain sort to flourish. I know that quite a lot of the students that I know at CUNY were heavily involved in Occupy Sandy, which was when the hurricane came and it destroyed that whole sort of coastal area of New York City. Well, actually the first people out there were the people from Occupy. They were there before the federal government got there, before the Red Cross got there, before everybody else got there. And they organised all kinds of things. And they organised, you know, sort of getting generators out there, putting people back, helping people get out of their houses, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was a fantastic kind of thing. And what was astonishing was the sudden change of tone in the New York Times, which when Occupy was on, depicted all these kids as being irrational, stupid, unproductive members of society. And they suddenly, the New York Times sent a reporter out and looked at Occupy Sandy and said, well, these kids are the ones who actually saved people's lives. And actually really did actually help people in a time of crisis and need, and did so at least 3 or 4 days before anybody else got there, and certainly did it in a way which was not bureaucratically regulated and was spontaneously constructed. So, there are these possibilities, and I think the vision that becomes of that is one of a society with maximum individual liberty, maximum free time, under conditions of solidarity which guarantee that everybody has the same rights and possibilities as you do.
Take a few more questions, maybe, or?
Yeah. I'll keep going,
I think the interest is, continues. I have, les pido disculpas que no leo todas las preguntas, pero resumiendo algunas de las nueces para que nos siga platicando. Here's a very concrete one. Do you know of successful cases of the struggle against developers, urban developers? What's been particular cases that you can pick out in the global scene as an inspiration for others who are struggling? If a particular person is asking this who's struggling against a construction project which is going to cover over and dry up a water stream in the Nexus city.
Well, I think there are lots of particular examples of resistance. I visited with quite a few of them, but there are 2 points I would want to make about this. First is resistance is one thing. Turning that resistance into the building of an alternative is quite another thing. There are attempts, for example, in New York City to resist gentrification, and they'll be successful, some of them. But then the problem arises of, well, how are we going to turn this into affordable housing? And can we turn it into non-market housing? There are legal structures that allow you to do that, and some of them do exist in New York City. So yes, but the difficulty is, like I say, moving from simply resistance and saying no to moving to a kind of thing saying, well, this is the alternative that we want to build and transform. We have a crisis of affordable housing in New York City. There are many struggles against gentrification, but some of those struggles have been successful, some have not. But the difficulty is to find the resources to construct an alternative. For instance, there was a big struggle in one of the London Labour boroughs over a housing complex which was in the public domain, which was going to be privatised. And there's a huge struggle to prevent its privatisation. But now the local council is faced with the fact that it cannot privatise the housing complex, but it has no resources to fix it up. So what is it going to do? Because the Conservative government won't give them any resources to fix it up. So here's the typical dilemma. So there's always 2 stages. One is resist and the other is construct. And the big problem is the construct one. And this construct one can sometimes be as difficult, if not more difficult, than the resist one.
Another question. I'll translate in Spanish. Con respecto a su afirmación de que el capital está al servicio de los super ricos, with regard to your statement that capital is at the service of the super rich, ¿cuál es su opinión sobre la explosión en el aumento de los ingresos de la clase media? What's your opinion about the explosion in the income of the middle class? Y el aumento de la clase media y su defensa de las propuestas políticas de extrema derecha. And this increase of the middle class has led to the defense of extreme right-wing politics. Son ellos ahora los defensores del sistema capitalista. The middle class are the ones who are now most defending the capitalist system.
Well, the middle class has always defended the capitalist system. So I find nothing surprising about that. I think segments of the middle class have sometimes objected to neoliberal forms of capitalism on a variety of grounds, so that if we talk about an anti-neoliberal politics, I would expect that at least a significant segment of the middle class, however that's constituted in a particular place and time, I would expect them to support, if you like, some measures of anti-neoliberal politics. The difficulty comes, however, in certain areas. For example, a lot of the support for the far right comes from a deep concern for one thing, which is security, and how to ensure security of life in a situation of chronic insecurity. So here, I think again, there is an issue for the left in terms of what it does in relationship to security practices, because you don't want to get into repressive forms of control of criminality and all the rest of it at the same time, as you don't want to sort of, quote, be lax on crime, because that will then immediately lead to a right-wing backlash of a certain kind and a move of middle-class populations to the right. So where the middle class is kind of problematic, and of course the other thing about middle class, depending upon where you are in the world, you have in some parts of the world a rising middle class, China being a very good example, and in other parts of the world a failing middle class. The United States is, I think right now, a failing middle class country. That the middle class is dividing, if you like, to an affluent upper middle class, and the rest of the middle class that is being proletarianized and basically pushed down into the gig economy and all the rest of it, and insecurity of labor and the like. So what's happening to class formation in a particular place and time is going to, alter very much the nature of the class analysis. But this again comes back to the idea that I think is important, that there are no sort of rigid prescriptions. The point of a historical materialist analysis is to do a good analysis of the class relations which exist, the production capacities that exist in your place and in your time, and then try to find a socialist way to improve those conditions in certain dimensions. But, depending upon where you are and what the configuration of populations is and so on, you're obviously not necessarily going to come up with the same solution in this part of the world as you would in some other part of the world. And I think that, again, the idea of a framework of this kind is to say, okay, here's the framework, now let's fill it with information and data and see who's doing what with whom, and what segment of the class of those people who are involved in the environmental struggle are also part of the anti-capitalist coalition, because there are a lot of people in the capitalist class who think they can solve the environmental issue via the market. And the result of that is that some of the billionaires in society are strong environmentalists. But they have particular kinds of ways in which they see the solutions, which are very different from the kinds of ways in which I would want to see them from an anti-capitalist perspective. So, yeah, we know all of those variations are there, but we have to look and do a historical materialist analysis. And this is the point of Marx, to kind of say, all right, you have a general idea about how the system is working, but we've got to look very specifically in my place and time as to what is exactly happening where and how it's going to be used and how we're going to respond to it politically.
Great. There's just one comment about the Mexican revolutionary tradition. So we talked about work. Article 123 of our Constitution says that all Mexicans have a right to a dignified and socially useful work. not applied, of course, but it's there in our Constitution. Article 27 says that all lands and waters of Mexico belong originally to the nation, not the state, collected, which can then be handed over to individuals, thereby creating private property. But first we have collective ownership and interest. These are inheritances of the Mexican Revolution. And so I think there are interesting ways in which, from Mexico itself, we can perhaps be a leader in reconstructing these new ideologies and visions.
Yeah, no, I hope so too. We need it. We need it badly.
Well, thank you so much, David. Fuerte aplauso. Y sigan atentos a las actividades de los foros de Diálogo por la Democracia, vamos a seguir convocándolas. Muchísimas gracias.
Por favor, a los que tienen aparato de traducción, en las salidas se entregarán y se les devolverán sus credenciales.
Por aquel lado, por favor, por aquel lado. Todo hasta allá. Este quítalo completo. Este quítalo completo.